The night rain had passed, leaving the world rinsed clean. Over the hills, the first light of morning crept softly, turning the wet grass into fields of glass. The small house, at the foot of the hill, glowed faintly beneath a blanket of mist. From its chimney, a thin wisp of smoke rose straight into the sky, a quiet promise that life, after all its tremors, had settled again. Inside, the smell of rice porridge drifted through the air. Tieu moved slowly across the room, her bare feet brushing against the bamboo floor. She carried her son, still half asleep, his warm breath against her neck. Outside, Truong's hammer struck rhythmically against wood, a familiar sound, gentle and strong, like a heartbeat returning to its old rhythm. She paused at the doorway, watching him. The morning sun caught on his hair, turning it gold. He was fixing the small bench near the well, the same one he'd made years ago before everything fell apart. The boards had warped from rain, but his hands, patient, deliberate, coaxed them back into place. When he looked up and saw her, his smile was quiet but certain. "Did he sleep?" "For a while," she said. "Now he just listens to your hammer and thinks it's music." Truong chuckled softly. "Then I'll make sure it plays in tune." The baby stirred, opening his eyes, dark and clear as the morning sky. Tieu swayed gently, humming a lullaby that her mother had once sung. The melody floated out into the yard, mingling with the scent of damp earth and smoke. Truong's mother stepped out then, carrying a woven tray filled with rice. She spread the grains on a mat to dry under the newborn sun. "You both talk too much and work too little," she teased, though her eyes shone with fondness. Tieu smiled. "Then we'll let the rice rest for us." The older woman shook her head, but her lips softened into a laugh. There had been a time, not so long ago, when laughter had no place in this house. Now, it arrived easily, like sunlight through open shutters. After breakfast, Truong's mother went to the temple market, leaving them alone. The silence that followed was not empty. It hummed with life, the rustle of the baby's blanket, the coo of a dove nesting near the window, the steady rhythm of Truong's breathing as he worked. He stopped for a moment, wiping sweat from his brow. "Do you remember?" he asked. "The day we planted the bougainvillea by the gate?" Tieu nodded, her gaze distant. "You said it would bloom every season, even if we didn't." He smiled ruefully. "I suppose you kept your promise better than I did." "It's blooming again," she said quietly. "It waited for you too." They stood for a moment in that shared silence, the kind that doesn't separate but binds. A sparrow landed near the well, pecking at the puddle left by the rain. The air smelled of renewal, of earth and iron and soft beginnings. Later that morning, as the sun rose higher, Tieu laid a mat on the porch and sat with her child. The baby's tiny fingers clutched at the edge of her scarf, his breath sweet with sleep. She watched Truong gather tools and wood scraps, humming while he worked. He had begun to carve small toys. A habit, he said, helped his hands stay steady. When the first toy bird took shape, he brought it to her. "Look," he said, shy as a boy. "It can't fly, but it can stay." She turned it in her hands, the little bird, smooth and light. "That's more than enough," she replied. "Sometimes, staying is harder than flying." He looked at her for a long moment, the woman who had waited, suffered, and still found a way to smile. Then he whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." She brushed a lock of hair from her face, her voice tender. "I almost did, but every night, when the wind touched the window, I thought maybe it was you still trying to find your way home." He reached for her hand. "It was," he said simply. The baby stirred and began to fuss. Tieu lifted him, rocking gently. "He doesn't like quiet for too long," she said. Truong smiled. "Then, he takes after you." They laughed together, the sound small and bright. It carried across the yard, over the fence, into the open air, where it mingled with the hum of morning. The mountains stood steady in the distance, the sky slowly clearing. By midday, the house smelled of ginger tea and sunlight. Truong's mother returned with a basket of greens and a new headscarf for Tieu. "The old one's too plain," she said. "A mother should look joyful." Tieu blushed, touched by the gesture. She tied the scarf around her hair, soft yellow, like the first light of day. Truong looked at her and grinned. "Now the house has 2 sons." His mother rolled her eyes, but her smile betrayed her amusement. "Flattery won't fix the roof," she said, and the 3 of them laughed. When the afternoon light stretched long across the fields, Truong set down his tools. Tieu joined him on the porch, the baby asleep in her arms. Together, they watched the breeze ripple through the rice stalks, turning them into waves of gold. For the first time in what felt like forever, the air around them held no ghosts, only the quiet hum of peace. Truong took her hand, their fingers intertwining easily, as if the months apart had never happened. The baby sighed in his sleep. The wind carried the sound of temple bells from far away. Truong's mother began humming again inside the kitchen, her voice soft, sure, and full of memory. And as the sun dipped low behind the hills, the house at the foot of the mountain glowed in the last light hole, warm and awake. After every storm, the narrator's voice would say, "There comes a morning that feels borrowed from heaven, the kind of morning that reminds you peace isn't given, it's chosen." The next few weeks unfolded like a gentle melody, each day blending quietly into the next, filled with the hum of chores, laughter, and the tiny, precious sounds of new life. The storms had passed. What remained was rhythm slow, patient, and human. Every morning, Truong rose before dawn. The sky still slept when he carried a lantern out to the yard. Its glow wavered on the wet soil as he checked the bamboo traps by the stream, then came back with water on his shoulders. When he returned, the house was stirring. The faint creak of the bed, the soft cooing of their child, the clink of bowls being arranged on the table. Tieu's voice drifted from the kitchen, not words, just a low hum. She always sang when she cooked, an old habit from lonely days when song was her only companion. Now, the same melodies felt different, no longer about waiting, but belonging. Truong's mother would join soon after, her hair tied in a bun, her steps steady on the bamboo floor. "Did you warm the porridge?" she'd ask. "It's still hot," Tieu would reply, handing her a bowl. "And I added ginger, the way you like." The older woman would smile, the corners of her eyes creasing softly. "You remember." "I remember everything," Tieu would say, and she meant more than recipes. By mid-morning, the air smelled of sunlight and boiled rice. Outside, Truong worked in the garden, reshaping the furrows, planting morning glory and beans. Their child slept in a woven cradle beneath the eaves, wrapped in a blanket his grandmother had sewn. Sometimes, when a gust of wind passed, the cradle swayed gently, and a chime hung by the window answered with a soft note, as if blessing the moment. Tieu would watch from the doorway, her baby in her arms. "He'll grow up chasing butterflies out there," she said. "Then I'd better plant more flowers," Truong replied. Their laughter echoed lightly over the fields. When the noon sun grew too strong, the family gathered for lunch. The meals were simple rice, a dish of greens, sometimes fish, if Truong had luck at the stream. Yet, there was something sacred in their quiet togetherness. Even the pauses between words felt full, as if silence itself had weight. After the meal, the house would rest. Truong's mother napped in the corner, the baby dozed beside her, and Tieu would sit by the window, mending old clothes. Light fell across her face in patches, filtering through the leaves outside. She liked this time of day best, when the air was still, and peace had a sound. Sometimes she would glance at Truong, asleep on the mat near the door, his hand still marked with sawdust. She'd smile to herself. There had been nights she feared she would never see this again, that the image of him, alive and within reach, was something only her dreams could hold. In those moments, gratitude filled her like breath. As evening approached, life in the house woke again. The baby's cry signaled the return of motion. Truong's mother rose to light the stove, while Tieu prepared tea. The smell of lemongrass filled the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of steamed corn. Outside, the sky blushed with orange and purple, the last sunlight sliding down the hill. Children's laughter drifted from the lane. Somewhere, a cow lowed, and a rooster, confused by the dim light, crowed too early. Life in the village had its own clumsy poetry. One evening, as the family sat outside, Truong brought something from behind his back, a small wooden chair, newly carved. "For you," he said to Tieu shyly. "You always sit on the step to feed him. This one fits better." She ran her fingers along the wood, feeling its smooth grain. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You made this?" He nodded, "With what I had left from the cradle. I thought, you deserved your own place too." "Ah," her throat tightened. "I don't need a chair," she said softly. "I have a home." Truong didn't answer, but his eyes shone with quiet joy. From the kitchen, his mother watched the exchange with a secret smile. She remembered how, not long ago, she doubted this girl, her silence, her patience, her strength. But now, as she saw Tieu laugh, holding the child close, she realized that love didn't need to be loud to be true. Later that night, after the baby had fallen asleep, Tieu stepped outside. The moon hung low, silvering the edges of the fields. Truong followed, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "It's cold," he said. "Not when you're here," she whispered. They stood there, listening to the distant croak of frogs, the whisper of reeds. A gentle wind brushed past, carrying the faint smell of ripening rice. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but mostly, I think about tomorrow and how to make sure it looks like today." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then, promise me something." "What?" "No matter what comes, no running, no hiding, no silence." He nodded. "I promise." The moon climbed higher, casting their shadows across the ground. Two figures, and a smaller one, asleep inside, bound together by light. Inside the house, Truong's mother murmured in her sleep, dreaming of laughter and lullabies. The oil lamp flickered, painting soft gold on the walls. For once, there was nothing left to fix, no ghosts to chase away. Only the rhythm of ordinary days, the kind that make life quietly extraordinary. Happiness, the narrator's voice might say, isn't the noise that follows joy. It's the hush that comes when you finally stop waiting for storms. Morning came softly, like a shy visitor who knocked before entering. The fog that rolled down from the hills still lingered over the fields, catching sunlight on its silver edges. In the kitchen, the faint scent of ginger tea filled the air. Tieu was already awake, her hair tied loosely, her baby balanced on her hip as she stirred the pot of porridge with one hand. Every movement was slow, deliberate, the quiet rhythm of a woman whose world had finally found balance. From outside came the sound of Truong chopping wood. Each strike echoed steady and measured, falling into rhythm with the clinking of bowls inside. Through the window, Tieu could see him, the morning light tracing his shoulders, the small plume of breath that rose when he paused. to wipe his brow. He looked peaceful in a way she hadn't seen before. Not the peace of rest, but of belonging. She ladled porridge into 3 bowls, setting one aside for him. A moment later, he entered, carrying a bundle of freshly cut wood and the smell of dew. Their son reached out, gurgling with laughter. "Already awake, little one?" Truong said, smiling. "You've grown heavier overnight." "He dreams of catching the wind," Tieu replied, placing the child into his arms. "You must have taught him." They shared a soft laugh. Outside, the first birds began to sing. Truong sat down, balancing the baby on his knee, while Tieu poured tea. The moment was simple, and yet, to them, it was the kind of happiness they had once thought impossible. Truong looked up from his cup. "I have something for you," he said. She blinked in surprise. "For me?" He nodded toward the doorway. "Wait here." He stepped outside, leaving her with curiosity stirring like light through mist. When he returned, he carried a small wooden object wrapped in cloth. He placed it on the table and untied the knot. Inside was a chair, smooth, rounded, polished to a soft sheen. Carved along the backrest were small flowers, chrysanthemums, her favorite. "I made it from the leftover guava wood," he said, almost shy. "For you to sit and feed him. You shouldn't always kneel." Her hand brushed over the carvings. "They look real," she whispered. "I tried," he smiled. "You once said chrysanthemums don't fear the cold. I thought that suited you." The words settled between them like warmth. Tieu traced the petals with her fingertips, feeling the quiet devotion hidden in each stroke of the knife. Her eyes glistened. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever made for me." Truong looked down, embarrassed but proud. "It's not much. It's everything," she said softly, "because it came from your hands." From the doorway, his mother watched silently, her heart swelling at the sight. She remembered the boy who used to run barefoot through the fields, carving wooden birds to sell at the market. Now he was a man building a life, not from ambition, but from tenderness. That afternoon, while Truong repaired the fence, Tieu sat on her new chair under the shade of the bougainvillea, cradling her son. The pink blossoms fell around them like quiet blessings. She hummed as she rocked the baby, and the world seemed to hold its breath to listen. When Truong's mother returned from the market, she stopped at the gate. For a long moment, she simply watched the young woman's hair catching light, the child's small hand clutching her blouse, the gentle peace that wrapped around them like silk. She walked over and placed a small bundle beside the chair. "I brought thread," she said, "and wool. I thought I might knit something." "For the baby?" Tieu asked, smiling. "For both of you," the older woman replied. "You'll need warmth before the year turns cold." Tieu's throat tightened. "Thank you, mother." The older woman shrugged. "Don't thank me. Just wear it when it's done." But her voice was softer than before, almost tender. As the day stretched on, Truong finished mending the fence and came to sit beside them. He placed the baby in his lap and let his small fingers curl around his thumb. "He's strong," he said. "Look at that grip." Tieu laughed. "He'll take after you stubborn and steady. Then, he'll need your patience to balance it." Their eyes met, and in that shared gaze, all the storms they had weathered seemed to fade into memory. When evening came, the 3 generations sat together under the dim glow of the oil lamp. The baby slept in his cradle, his breathing soft and even. Truong's mother sat nearby, knitting with quiet concentration. The steady click of her needles filled the silence like a heartbeat. Truong carved another small toy, a horse, this time while Tieu mended a shirt he had torn at work. The room smelled of warm rice, sandalwood, and life going on. At one point, Truong looked up and said softly, I used to think love was something you had to fight for. And now? Tieu asked, not looking up from her stitching. Now, I think it's something you build one small thing at a time. She nodded, smiling. Then let's keep building. Outside, the wind brushed through the trees, scattering the scent of flowers. The night wrapped itself around the house, gentle and unhurried. As the oil lamp flickered, the narrator's voice might whisper, in the quiet moments between sunrise and moonlight, love reveals itself not in grand gestures or words, but in the thousand small things that make a home feel alive. Tieu placed her work aside and leaned her head against Truong's shoulder. The baby stirred briefly, sighed, and slept on. His mother's needles paused for a moment, then resumed their rhythm, the steady music of a house at peace. Outside, the bougainvillea rustled softly, shedding another handful of petals that drifted through the open window and landed beside the chair, the gift of everyday love. The air turned colder as autumn deepened, and the scent of burning straw drifted through the valley. Each morning, mist curled around the hill like soft smoke, and the rice fields shimmered pale gold beneath the weak sun. Inside the house, life continued with quiet steadiness, the same familiar rhythm, yet something unspoken was beginning to shift. Truong had gone early to the field that morning. Tieu, still in her faded blue blouse, knelt by the basin, washing clothes in warm water. Her son lay on a mat nearby, kicking his legs, babbling to the sound of her humming. The air smelled of soap and lemongrass. Steam rose gently, catching the light like thin silk. From behind, she heard the soft scrape of slippers on the floor. Truong's mother appeared at the doorway, holding a small bundle of red yarn. "You work too much," she said simply. Tieu turned, startled. "The water's warm. It helps my hands stay soft," she replied, smiling. The older woman hesitated, then placed the bundle on the table. "I finished the scarf," she said. "It was meant for the baby, but perhaps you should wear it first." Tieu froze, unsure if she'd heard right. "For me?" "Yes," the mother said, her tone calm but her eyes glimmering. "You've caught enough wind for all of us these past months." Tieu wiped her hands and took the scarf, a deep, gentle red, the color of ripened fruit. The stitches were slightly uneven, but warm under her fingertips. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The older woman waved a hand. "It's just wool and time. Nothing special." But Tieu saw more than wool. She saw care stitched into every loop, a quiet forgiveness that had taken shape through patience. "Still," she said softly, "it means more than you think." The mother nodded and turned toward the stove. "I'll make tea." They moved together around the room, two women once divided by silence, now connected by small gestures. The baby began to fuss, and the older woman stepped forward instinctively. "Give him here," she said. "You'll never finish that washing with him calling for you every breath." Tieu hesitated, then handed her the child. The boy blinked, studying the new pair of arms that held him. Then, as if remembering the scent of the woman who sang to him each night, he smiled. The mother laughed, a sound so light it startled even her. "He has your eyes," she said. Tieu paused. "Truong's, I think." "No," the woman said, brushing a finger over the child's cheek. Truong's eyes were never this gentle. For a long moment, the house was filled only with the small sounds of life, the rustle of cloth, the creak of bamboo, the bubbling of water over fire. It was the kind of silence that wrapped, not separated. That evening, when Truong returned, he found his mother sitting by the fire with the baby asleep in her lap. Tieu sat beside her, sewing under the lamplight. The scene stopped him in his tracks. It felt like a memory he had longed for, finally made real. "Something smells good," he said, smiling. "Your wife cooked," his mother replied, pretending to scold. "And I taught her my recipe, so if it's bad, we'll both share the blame." Truong laughed, dropping his tools by the door. "Then I'm safe either way." They ate together. The meal was simple pumpkin soup, steamed greens, and sweet rice. Yet it tasted different, richer somehow. Between them, conversation flowed easily now. Talk of weather, of the baby's new tooth, of the harvest. The sharp edges that once cut their words were gone. After dinner, Truong's mother took the scarf and wrapped it around Tieu's shoulders. "You'll wear it when we go to the temple tomorrow," she said. "The temple? Every autumn, I offer incense for my husband. This year, you'll come too. The family should go together." Tieu's lips parted in surprise, but she only nodded, her eyes warm with tears. "Yes, mother." That night, long after the others had fallen asleep, Tieu sat on the porch, watching the stars. The scarf lay across her lap, glowing faintly under the moonlight. It smelled faintly of smoke and jasmine. She heard footsteps behind her. Truong came out, rubbing his eyes. "Can't sleep? Too much peace," she said with a small laugh. "I'm not used to it yet." He sat beside her, following her gaze to the sky. "I saw the way she looked at you tonight," he said quietly. "She hasn't looked at anyone like that since my father passed." Tieu lowered her head, her voice almost a whisper. "She's forgiven me. She never blamed you," he said gently. "She just didn't know how to stop being afraid." They sat there, hand in hand, as the night deepened. The fields shimmered silver under the moon, the sound of crickets weaving through the silence. When the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Tieu closed her eyes and breathed in the cool air. It smelled of smoke, dew, and beginnings. The next day, they went to the temple together, 3 generations walking the dusty path in quiet harmony. The baby slept against Tieu's chest, wrapped in the red scarf. The wind was sharp, but the warmth of the fabric felt like an embrace. At the temple gate, Truong's mother lit 3 sticks of incense. "For those who came before us," she said softly. Tieu lit 3 more. "For those who are here now," Truong added the last 3. "And for what's yet to come." The smoke rose, blending into a single trail before disappearing into the blue sky. As they stood there, side by side, the bell tolled from the temple tower, slow, resonant, carrying through the valley. It was a sound of closure and continuation, all at once. The mother looked at Tieu and said quietly, "From now on, you'll walk beside me when I come here. A daughter shouldn't walk behind." Tears blurred Tieu's vision. She bowed her head and whispered, "Yes, mother." The bell rang again, and somewhere in that sound, the past finally let go. "Forgiveness," the narrator's voice would say, "isn't spoken in grand words. It is woven quietly, in scarves, in laughter, in the warmth that stays long after the fire dies." As they walked back down the hill, the wind lifted the ends of the red scarf, letting it dance in the air, not as a symbol of apology, but as one of belonging. It had been 1 year since the day Truong returned. The morning rose clear and soft, sunlight pooling like honey over the tiled roofs and wet leaves. The air carried the scent of ripening rice and smoke from distant kitchens. Inside the small house by the hill, Tieu stirred awake to the sound of laughter, the kind that belonged to a home, finally at peace. Through the half-open window, she saw Truong and his mother in the yard, hanging paper lanterns from the low branches of the bougainvillea. The flowers had burst into full bloom again, pink petals cascading like silk ribbons. Their son toddled between them, his tiny feet unsteady but fearless. Every time he fell, Truong's mother scooped him up, laughing, while Truong brushed the dust from his knees. Tieu smiled, her heart swelling with that quiet warmth that comes from seeing love move naturally, without effort. She tied her hair with the red scarf, the one her mother-in-law had knitted months ago, and stepped outside. "What's all this?" she asked, pretending not to know. Truong turned, his eyes bright in the morning light. "Today marks a year since I came home. I thought we should celebrate." She tilted her head, teasing. "Celebrate what exactly? The day you frightened me half to death?" He grinned. "No, the day you decided to forgive me." Behind them, his mother chuckled. "Then, we all have something to celebrate." By noon, the house smelled of coconut, rice, and grilled fish. Steam rose from the clay pots, and the sound of clinking dishes echoed across the yard. Tieu worked side by side with her mother-in-law, the two women moving easily in rhythm. One stirred the broth, the other arranged plates of fruit. Every so often, they glanced at each other and exchanged quiet smiles, wordless but full of affection. When the table was set, Truong stepped back to admire their work. "It looks like a feast," he said. His mother wiped her hands on her apron. "It's not a feast, it's a thank you." "To whom?" "To time," she said simply, "for giving us a second chance." The first guests began to arrive just after midday. Neighbors from the village, familiar faces carrying baskets of vegetables, jugs of tea, and hesitant smiles. Some had once whispered behind closed doors. Now, their voices were soft with apology disguised as congratulations. "The baby's so big," one woman said, "and handsome, just like his father." Another chimed in, "We always knew you two would find your way back." Truong smiled politely, choosing grace over pride. "We're just glad to still be here." Inside, the baby clapped his hands at the sight of so many faces. Tieu knelt beside him, holding his arms steady as he tried to walk toward the lanterns swaying in the breeze. Laughter filled the house, not the sharp, gossiping kind that used to wound her, but laughter that wrapped around her like sunlight. After the meal, Truong disappeared for a moment and returned, carrying something hidden behind his back. "Close your eyes," he said to Tieu. She laughed. "You and your surprises. Trust me," he insisted. When she opened her eyes, he was holding a small wooden box. Inside lay a delicate comb, carved from light bamboo, smooth as silk. "I made it for you," he said. "For all the mornings you never stopped showing up, even when I didn't." Her eyes filled with tears. "Truong," he shook his head gently. "No more words. Just wear it. And remember, every piece of wood in this house has your name carved in it somehow." From behind them, his mother spoke softly. "He gets that from his father, too many feelings, not enough sense." They all laughed. As the sun began to fall, the yard glowed gold. The villagers lingered, watching the lanterns sway gently above the gate. Some brought small gifts, a bag of rice, a clay pot, a new blanket. The same voices that once carried judgment now carried blessings. When the guests left, the family sat together under the bougainvillea. The baby, drowsy from excitement, curled in Tieu's lap. Truong's mother poured tea, her hands steady despite the trembling light. "This house," she said, looking around, "has learned to breathe again." Truong nodded. "It's because of her." Tieu smiled shyly. "Because of all of us." For a long while, no one spoke. The crickets had begun their song, and the first stars flickered awake above the hills. The lanterns glowed softly, their lights swaying like memory. Truong took his wife's hand. "Do you remember the first night I came back?" he asked. "How could I forget?" she said, half laughing. You looked like a ghost afraid of his own home, and you looked like someone who didn't believe in ghosts anymore," he replied. They sat quietly after that, listening to the night settle around them. The air smelled of tea and wood smoke, of something ending and something beginning. The baby stirred, opening his eyes. He looked up at his parents, then at the lanterns, his tiny fingers reaching for the light he could not touch. Tieu kissed his forehead and whispered, "Someday, you'll understand that happiness isn't loud. It's this right here." The old woman's voice joined hers. "May it last longer than we ever dreamed." Truong leaned closer to his family, his arm wrapped around them both. "It will," he said. The wind passed gently through the bougainvillea, scattering a few petals into the teacups on the table. No one brushed them away. They let them float there, small symbols of luck, of imperfection, of life. As the final lantern flickered against the dark, the narrator's voice would say, "Happiness is not a grand arrival, but a quiet staying in the warmth of shared tea, in the echo of laughter under a fading sky. It is the simple truth that after every storm, some homes still remember how to bloom." And in that small house by the hill, where once there had been only silence, there was now the sound of family, steady, tender, and whole.